Here's another installment in our investigation of An Introduction to Microbiology by Tortora. We've made our way to chapter 25, and we've already covered some diseases of the digestive system. And this is part 2 of chapter 25. We'll look at a few more diseases. Mumps, a disease that's been reduced in prevalence in this country by the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. It targets the parotid salivary glands. These glands kind of along the side of your mandible, right anterior to your ears, and they can become very inflamed and sore. It multiplies in the respiratory tract and reaches the salivary glands by way of the bloodstream. So it gets listed as a respiratory disease, particularly as a digestive system disease, since the salivary glands are an accessory organ of digestion. There are some potential worse outcomes in rare cases of mumps, and that's exactly why there's a standard vaccine protocol for children. It's one of the vaccines that's given to all children in this country whenever possible. There's a picture of someone with swollen parotid gland caused by the mumps virus. Hepatitis simply means inflammation of the liver, but oftentimes when we talk about hepatitis, we're talking about viral infections of the liver that cause the inflammation. Inflammation can caused by Epstein-Barr virus or cytomegalovirus, but usually there's a series of 5 hepatitis viruses that are thought of when you say hepatitis. Hepatitis A is transmitted via fecal-oral route, contaminated food. So people in food preparation that are carriers or have hepatitis can transmit it by contaminating the food. And so it's important to be vaccinated or exercise extremely good hygiene if you work in a food service industry. It multiplies the epithelial lining of the intestines and spreads to the liver, kidneys, and spleen, and causes weight loss, feeling of illness, nausea, diarrhea, fever, and chills. And jaundice, as the liver becomes inflamed, it can no longer do its job of collecting the bilirubin produced by recycling red blood cells. The bilirubin remains in the blood, therefore, and has a yellow-green pigmented bilirubin that's going to be visible now in tissues where the blood is flowing through. Symptoms last 2 to 21 days, and so it causes outbreaks among people that get in a restaurant, say that a whole bunch of people eat contaminated food. Hepatitis B is much more considered a problem because hepatitis B can cause chronic hepatitis. It's a double-stranded DNA enveloped virus transmitted by blood or bodily fluid. So people who work in the healthcare industry are at least here are mandatorily offered the hepatitis B vaccine in order to prevent their infection by their patients. Up to 1 billion viruses per ml of blood. That's a pretty impressive load of virus in the body. Detection is of antigens. There's several antigens that are used for detection of HBV. There's a surface antigen, a core antigen, and antigen E, used by enzyme immunoassay, or the old name ELISA assay, enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay, to detect those antigens and antibodies. There's a hepatitis B vaccine, as I mentioned. Very good idea to get that if you're going to be a nurse or a doctor or a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant. There's no specific treatment. You've got to get the vaccine. Ultimately, they require liver transplantation if the liver gets destroyed by the virus. It causes chronic disease. It may actually cause liver cancer. Just some pictures of the virus particles seen by electron microscopy, not something you're going to see in a clinical setting. Occasionally can cause sudden liver damage and fatality, but usually it causes chronic, in 10% of patients it causes chronic hepatitis, and 90% of people get over it like they do with hepatitis A, but in this case we're talking about chronic hepatitis that leads to cirrhosis, complete destruction of the liver, scarring, and death of the hepatocytes of the liver, or liver cancer. The hepatitis B virus E antigen is considered a sign of vigorously replicating virus. So there's again an EIA test for that. Hepatitis C. This is an interesting case where technology is the victor. Hepatitis C, right up until very recently, was a death sentence. There was no treatment for it. People would acquire hepatitis C usually by accident when they went to the hospital with a severe trauma, due to a blood transfusion, and then it would be found that they had been transmitted hepatitis C to their blood through the transfusion, and a very, very bad disease, causes destruction of the liver. 80%, 85% become chronic, and then goes on to produce cirrhosis or liver cancer. Now, though, as of late, specific viral proteases that are needed for the maturation of the virus and the polymerases that the virus uses for replicating its genome have been exploited, and there are chemical treatments for to block those functions, and hepatitis C is now a treatable disease. Pretty wonderful stuff. There was some interesting controversy surrounding the cost of some of the medications, but at least it's no longer a death sentence. There's a picture of a healthy liver, that bronze liver tissue with lots of iron stored in there, and here's a pretty much expired liver from scarring, fatty infiltration, and so forth. Hepatitis D and E, we don't really make much bones about. Hepatitis D is usually acquired as a co-infection with hepatitis B. People with especially immune compromise may have hepatitis B and D. Hepatitis E is a lot like hepatitis A, spread by fecal-oral transmission, and endemic in areas where there is such an opportunity, where there's less sanitation by habit. So after eating in a restaurant, 355 people were diagnosed with the same hepatitis virus. Can you identify infections that would cause these symptoms? And of the hepatitis viruses, I think you could remember that the one we said was associated with contaminated food was hepatitis A. That's the most likely cause of those diseases. Viral gastroenteritis. Rotavirus is an extremely common virus in children. Causes low-grade fever, diarrhea, and vomiting. Can cause dehydration in children. There is now a vaccine for rotavirus, and it's recommended by the CDC that children be vaccinated. It's not a standard vaccine that's associated with the mandatory vaccine protocols, but it is actually required in certain states that children children go to daycare, they have to be immunized for rotavirus. Norovirus, another severe diarrhea-causing virus that causes outbreaks in, say, long-term healthcare settings especially, but also hospitals and swimming venues. Fecal-oral transmission, so that you would instantly thought of that when you heard about swimming, right? You get in the water and some fecal extraction occurs, and the opportunity for transmission of whatever pathogens are present. 18 to 48 hour incubation followed by the diarrhea and vomiting, detection by PCR and enzyme immunoassays. So, our little case study. An outbreak of diarrhea begins in mid-June, peaks in mid-August, and tapers off in September. Clinical case is defined as diarrhea 3 loose stools during a 24-hour period in a member of a swim club. What virus are we talking about? Probably norovirus. Another place where epidemics occur is on cruise ships. Sometimes there's a huge outbreak on a cruise ship, and they even have to go in port and seek assistance for people that get sick with norovirus. A little short section on digestion of fungi. 2 fungi we're going to look at produce toxins that are very, very bad, cause nervous system disorders, kidney damage, liver damage, or possibly cancer. Here are 2 toxins produced by molds that get into various food sources. And ergot poisoning, or ergot poisoning, is a mycotoxin produced by Claviceps purpurea, and grains get contaminated or get colonized by this fungus, and then the toxin is produced, and then people ingest the food not knowing that it's poison, and they wind up with a couple of possible problems. One problem that's caused by this toxin is vasoconstriction, reducing flow in the digits, and that causes gangrene and therefore loss of digits, fingers and toes. Also causes convulsions and hallucinations. So it's actually interesting. A couple of modern day students of this kind of subject have written proposals that the Salem witch trials represented accusations based around convulsions and hallucinations and sensations of crawling of the skin of people who were experiencing ergot poisoning. It's an interesting theory. There's been people that refuted it, but it's just an interesting concept. Aflatoxin is produced by Aspergillus flavus, likely to be on is common on peanuts in certain settings, grains, and even corn, especially in developing countries. People that grow their own food in developing countries, they don't have the facilities to have crops tested. In this country, all the crops are tested for these fungi and for the toxins, so that there isn't outbreaks of these kinds of poisons. But in developing countries, that may not be the case, and especially when people grow their own produce, they may not know or have a way of, they have to eat it, they have to survive subsistence farming and so forth. Aflatoxin causes liver cirrhosis and liver cancer, so a couple of bad toxins there. We've run into Giardia intestinalis already. It's a very scary and interesting little bug, little protozoan that's found in fecally contaminated water, contaminated by animals or people. And so if you're out in the wilderness hiking around this beautiful flowing stream, think twice before you go and drink the water. You'll get some cysts from the water potentially, and the trophozoites will then germinate from the cysts and feast on your body. Attaches the intestinal wall, produces prolonged diarrhea, malaise, weight loss, flatulence, foul-smelling flatulence, hydrogen sulfide. It's a sort of a rotten egg smell. Diagnosed with microscopic examination of stool samples. We also mentioned earlier the string test, in which a patient can be asked to swallow a string with a little weighted gelatinous bulb on the end of it, and swallow it down and let it spend some time, a few hours, so that it goes down into the intestine, and then hoist it back up and examine the bulb for the presence of Giardia protozoa. Also, there's serological tests available, metronidazole and nitazoxanide for treatment. And there's a picture of some Giardia swimmers and a cyst. All right, talk about bad diarrhea. Cryptosporidiosis. Cryptosporidium, parvum, and hominis are 2 species of these protozoa that release sporozoites, that invade the intestinal epithelium and cause cholera-like diarrhea for upwards of 2 weeks. Imagine having extremely bad diarrhea, worse than anything you've had in your life, for 14 days. It's just a real rough go. So it's worth trying to combat this kind of thing. Transmitted fecal-oral route through drinking water, contaminated drinking water, recreational water, water parks, splash pads, places where people congregate and have to go in the water. When it was first kind of observed in water, there were protocols for filtration of the water to remove pathogenic bacteria, but the Cryptosporidium was small enough to get through and contaminate the water and cause outbreaks. And I'm sure that most places now make pretty sure they can keep the water clean, but if people show up to the water park and are contaminated, they may produce enough of a contamination to form an outbreak. And, so think about that the next time you're going to the water park in the summer, and have fun. Immunoassays and fluorescence antibody tests are available to detect crypto. Treatment with the antiprotozoal nitazoxanide. There's sporozoites and an oocyst about to invade the intestinal epithelium. You can see the microbial on the surface of the epithelial cells. Big trouble ahead for this person. It's going to be a rough ride for a couple of weeks. Cyclospora, another protozoan that relatively recently became a problem, became known, and it's caused, again, severe watery diarrhea that lasts for weeks and seems to be getting better, then gets worse again, then better, then worse, and it just goes on and on. Potentially, oocysts are ingested in drinking water or produce contaminated with feces. It's been associated with berries, different kinds of berries that are bought fresh from out of the country. You'll see a statement by the CDC that says it's not associated with frozen fruit, but I can tell you, I actually was lucky enough, if you want to call it that, to be infected with Cyclospora. It was a documented case, living in where were we? Albany, New York. No, Cleveland, Ohio, sorry. Living in Cleveland at the time, and it was from frozen strawberries, and someone made a fruit salad with frozen strawberries, and that were contaminated and caused an outbreak among everyone that was at a picnic that ate the fruit salad. It was Cyclospora, very severe diarrhea. I actually even passed out from it at one point from dehydration of it, and finally got better and thought, wow, I hope I never have that experience again. And a few months later, my sister-in-law got married, and we went to my mother-in-law's house, and she was serving strawberry shortcake with the same brand of frozen strawberries, and my wife said, oh no, not eating that. She also had it, and I said, come on, what are the chances that 2 separate packs sold in different parts of the country are going to both be contaminated the same way? And lo and behold, my father-in-law and I both came down and got the same infection with Cyclospora a second time. He had to walk down the aisle with his daughter in a very, very uncomfortable state. Anyway, it was quite something, I'll tell you. Very memorable diarrhea. Okay, that's pretty gross. Amoebic dysentery, Entamoeba histolytica, can produce cysts that can survive the stomach acid. So when you ingest them through eating contaminated food or water when you travel, then you're going to wind up with these trophozoites in your large intestine, and you're going to have dysentery, which means there's not only gastroenteritis, but there's blood in the stool. That's what's called dysentery. Perforates the intestinal wall, if possible even. That's almost, if it breaks down the epithelium, that's a pretty rough go. And you have dysentery, but this can actually perforate the intestinal wall, letting the chyme from the intestine out into the peritoneum. That's the most unfortunate situation. It can also invade the liver. Enzyme immunoassays, again, for identification and treatment with metronidazole, protozoa, antiprotozoal, quite bad stuff right there. And I've mentioned before the old thing of don't drink the water and peel it. boil it or don't eat it when you're traveling into developing countries or countries where any of these kinds of things are endemic. Traveler's diarrhea, amoebic dysentery, and so forth. Here's a picture of an ulcer. Here's the epithelium, villi with the epithelium on the surface. These are all surfaces covered with this dark ribbon. There's the epithelial cells that are healthy. Here's a spot where there is no epithelium whatsoever. It's a sore, an ulcer on the surface of the intestine. That's the most dire condition indeed. All right, how about some helminths? I haven't talked about them yet. Here are whipworms, the most prevalent worm in the world in terms of numbers of people infected. Almost 1 billion people in the world infected with whipworm. That's pretty crazy. Ascaris worms, all throughout Mexico, Central and South America, large parts of Africa, India, parts of Asia, China. Those countries all have large numbers of people suffering from these kinds of helminth infections, hookworms, schistosomes, still a pretty large number of people, and then tapeworms, beef and pig tapeworms, and flukes. So how about those things? We've already talked quite a bit about these, so I won't go into much detail, but beef and pork tapeworms, Tinea saginata and solium. And there's also a fish tapeworm that we didn't mention much, but if you do like the fish, make sure when you catch your fish, cook them well, make sure that you don't acquire fish tapeworm. Trichinelosis, the adult tapeworm infects the intestine and grows to long lengths in the intestine potentially. There are some smaller types of tapeworms as well. Cysticercosis, some of the Tinea solium forms larvae that can go and cyst in different parts of the body. Cysticercosis, including eyes, pretty terrible. Ophthalmic cysticercosis, Tinea solium can actually lodge in the eye. Neurocysticercosis, getting into the brain, and so forth. There's a picture of a scolex of a tapeworm in the eyeball. It's formed like a fluid-filled space inside the eye. So yeah, that's pretty scary. Three-stage life cycle of tapeworms. They're excreted in the feces and ingested by animals. They hatch into cysticercus that lodges in the muscle of the animal, and then that gets eaten. Undercooked meat is the source typically of cysticerci. Those are the cysts that can get into your body and survive being ingested and then grow into the worms in the intestine. And then you can detect the eggs or segments. The tapeworms shed segments off into the feces in large numbers of eggs. Glycine again for killing off those guys. Echinococcus is a kind of tapeworm that causes what's called Hydatid disease. And here's a wolf or a dog will ingest some prey that is infected and has these cysts in it from the echinococcus, and then they become infected and they produce eggs that are released and cause contamination of the intermediate host. So sexual reproduction, the definitive host in the dogs and coyotes and wolves and so forth, and then intermediate host in the deer. Humans can become infected. They're a dead-end host for this organism. Humans don't then transmit the eggs to anywhere, but they can become infected, and it's the most unfortunate thing indeed, as the echinococcus can encyst in different organs of your body. We overlooked something I should have mentioned. There's no. Oh yes, I thought there was supposed to be another slide on Hydatid disease. So echinococcus causes the most unfortunate situation. Once the eggs hatch, the critters can migrate to the liver, lungs, or brain and grow there and form hydatid cysts. They can grow into very large sizes. There's a cyst type form, and then there's a worse form that can cause complete damage, destruction of your organs, and so a most unfortunate disease indeed. Remember, cook the meat. If you are wild game eating person, which I am very much in favor of that. I understand that. Make sure you cook the meat. Don't ingest any live cysts. You'll get possibly Hydatid disease. Very bad situation. There's Hydatid cyst in the lung, getting pretty large at this point. Pinworms, Enterobius. Again, we talked about this before. The tiny nematode that these guys lay their eggs. They crawl out and lay their eggs on the perianal skin, and the eggs cause extreme itching on the skin. They're very irritating to the skin, and oftentimes children acquire this particular helminth infection. People with mebendazole. There's the schematic of the life cycle of Enterobius. Children scratch their perianal region and get the eggs onto their fingers, and they transmit the eggs to other children and so forth. So pretty common outbreaks in school children. Hookworms, Decatur americanus, Wadenale, attach to the intestinal wall and eat blood and tissue. It saps you of your energy. It eats a lot of blood cells, causing anemia and lethargy. Acquired from human feces. This is the one that if you walk around barefoot in an area where the soil is contaminated with the eggs, or the larvae, I should say, they'll penetrate this, the plantar's skin, the skin on the soles of your feet, and get into your body. That's the most unfortunate situation. So not so much in this country, same kind of regions I was talking about before, Mexico, Central America, South America, tropical regions throughout parts of Africa, China, India, Asia, and don't go barefoot. That's the key. A lot of people don't have that option. There's an amazing picture of scanning electron micrograph of a hookworm. Look at his mouth. See the hooks for grabbing onto the surface of the intestine. Munching. Ascaris lumbricoides. We talked about this one before also. Got a really strange life cycle. The eggs are ingested from fecal contamination. They hatch into larvae, and then from the intestine they pass into the bloodstream, and they migrate to the lungs, and then from the lungs they migrate up through all the airways to the throat, and then are swallowed back down, and then develop into adult worms in the intestinal tract. Isn't that weird? And then once you get someone who gets a large load of worms, eventually will have worms coming out of their nose or mouth or anus. How about that for a social grace? Wow. A lot of people in this world have Ascaris. Just live with the possibility all the time. Whipworms. These are those tiny ones that have the largest infected population of the world of any helminth. We saw at the top of that graph a little while ago. Eggs enter the intestinal glands, hatch and grow on the intestinal surface, and live in the wall of the intestine as a parasite, feed on cell contents and blood. So they're gobbling up tissue and blood. Causes a similar problem we just talked about, anemia and malnutrition, because there's a large load of tiny worms that are eating up all your body fluids and body tissue, or your blood and body tissue, intestinal tissue. So you're going to have malnutrition because they're destroying the surface of the lining of the intestines. And there's the little offending agent. Trichinella spiralis comes from eating undercooked pork, typically, and you may even have an older family that would be still really worried about pork, whether it's well enough cooked, and because of the time. Trichinella is common, not so much anymore. So you consume the cysts from the undercooked meat, and cysts in the meat of the muscles of the animal. The worm matures into an adult and produces larvae in the intestines that invade other tissues and form new cysts. And they can get into all other organs and cause intestinal damage, or all other organ damage as well. There's a little diagram of the life cycle of trichinella. They insist in the muscles and other organs. So, a little clinical challenge. Public health officials in Pennsylvania are notified cases of watery diarrhea with frequent, sometimes explosive bowel movements among persons associated with a residential facility. Disease associated with eating snow peas. And we said that there's one of these pathogens that we talked about in this half that is associated with contaminated produce. Well, a couple of them actually, but most likely thing is probably Cyclospora. So it's also possible it was a norovirus outbreak that occurred from eating the snow peas. Is one of the particular greens that were associated with Cyclospora outbreak. All right, so that is our chapter, and we have one more chapter to go, and so meet me back here for chapter 26.